Hey folks, Simon here from Velo Performance. Welcome to the podcast. Now this week we have Chris Gibson from Barbells and Bikes. He's a keen cyclist and he's also an expert in his field of strength and conditioning. You just need to look at his social media and you know that the information that he's coming out with is credible and it's well thought out. In our conversation today, we discuss what's the most important thing to focus on and why strength training is not only important for performance but also for your long-term health and health span. So, without any further ado, let's get into it.
Hi, Simon, thank you for having me on the podcast. I am a strength and conditioning coach and personal trainer. I've been doing this job for a very long time, about 25 years. I work with a multitude of different clients, but have been specialising in working with cyclists, much like yourself, sort of the older cyclists over recent years. My history is in terms of academics. I studied physiology at Leeds University, and then went on to do qualifications with the NSCA, National Strength and Conditioning Association, and Exos, Athletes Performance. But then after that, it's been very much sort of a case of learning with lots of different clients across the years and sort of building up huge amounts of experience and then trying to do everything I can to pass that experience onto people.
The reason why I've got you on here is because we've been talking through Instagram. I think we came across each other. I saw your content on strength training for cycling and you've been seeing what I've been doing in the gym, and we've just been chit-chatting away. There are two things for this podcast. I want to interview people who are pretty inspirational as they get older, who are still showing people what's possible with their own bodies, on bikes, getting fit, strong, and in great shape. But the other thing I really wanted to do was try and bring people on that really know what they're talking about in their field, with strength and conditioning, nutrition, anything that I think is going to help the listener understand what they could do better to age in a way that will see them right up until their 90s. And I think this is the more I delve into it, I think it's fascinating. So the first logical step was when I started this, like, I need to speak to you. You know that I'm a big fan of strength training, and I've seen the stuff that you do in the gym. So I saw a video that you did the other day, and you were doing some plyometric stuff, jumping on boxes, band work, and I was like, yes, I love seeing this. This is so good. And I was like, let's talk, and I'm going to give you the table because I want you. We'll talk about a few things, but I want you to really sort of like give us your knowledge as to why it's from your perspective it's important for performance, but also important for athletes and the general population to be strong and make sure they have, good quality muscle.
Yeah, I think initially, yeah, likewise, as you said, is I think our views and our philosophies on training are very much aligned in terms of the importance of strength training, but also the really importance of strength training as we get older. And I think that's one area, certainly in cycling, that is overlooked anyway, but certainly in the older cyclist, I think it becomes a case of more and more miles at a slower pace, and that's what we're going to accept as getting older. And I think we both are very much of the opinion that it doesn't need to be that way, and we can keep getting stronger, and we can keep getting faster, and we can maintain very good times and good cycling and enjoy our cycling as much as anything else, and enjoy going fast, and that's cool, and that's okay. If we look at training, then we want to get those low-hanging fruit, and strength training is one of those things. It doesn't need to be overly complicated and overly complex, but it's something that we can add to our training, and we can have a hugely positive impact on our lives, but certainly our performance on the bike. Now, if we look at the aging process, and you've spoken about this in length before in a couple of your posts, we lose muscle mass as we get older. And it's not as we get that much older, it's past the age of 30. Age-related sarcopenia starts to happen. We can lose up to 5% of skeletal muscle every 10 years from the age of 30. And we want to do everything we can to hold on to that. In terms of function and strengthening around our joints, around our muscles, force production, but also, staying strong, staying robust, making sure we don't get injured. So the best way to offset that is to strength train, and is to lift heavier loads, and is to stress that muscle, and to make sure that we maintain it for as long as possible.
So from my understanding from strength training is that it's not just about building power and being, trying to, by doing strength training, people often think it's like, if I'm really strong, I can punch out more watts. In my understanding, that's part of the picture, but also for performances, the stronger you are, the less muscle units you recruit in your endurance riding, therefore you save yourself power.
Exactly. So if our strength ceiling is higher, then the amount of energy we use to produce submaximal efforts is lower. So it comes at a lower metabolic cost.
Yeah. Okay. So you become way more efficient the stronger you are.
Efficiency is the key, right? We become more efficient on the bike. So if we look at the benefits overall to cyclists, I think before we even look at performance, I think robustness and reduced injury risk is huge, right? As cyclists, we want to be cycling. We want to be out on our bikes, and there is an inevitability. It's a repeated movement. It's in a set position a lot of the time. Obviously, we are up and down at the saddle, but we're in a set position a lot of the time, and there is a susceptibility to overuse injuries, stress injuries, those sort of things. And strength training has been shown to increase muscle strength, connective tissue strength, bone density.
So the one thing that's like pinging in the back of my mind is that for the most part, and I'm very bad for this, but I sit in front of the computer all day, right? So people see what I do and think, oh, he's always on a bike, which is, probably not wrong, but also wrong in the fact that when I do my training, I'm on my bike. But for the most part of the day, I am sat down and I'm very dysfunctional. And I think that's the majority of people. They sit at work a lot. They sit on buses to go to work. They sit in their car. So that dysfunction is created in their everyday life. And also there's a dysfunction in cycling too, in the fact that it's very quad dominant. And if you have that dysfunction from everyday life, that's how you get injured. And my thinking on this is that strength training helps stop that from happening. It equalizes stuff out.
It helps give us balance.
Yeah.
Balance across that musculature, balance across those joints, better mobility, better capacity to access certain movements, and in accessing certain movements, accessing more available power. I think we have mentioned bone density, right? You're sitting a lot of the day. Cycling is zero impact through nature, and another thing that happens with age is our bone density dramatically decreases, and in order to maintain bone density and keep our bones strong, we need to stress them. And the best way to do that, and research has shown the best way to do that, is axial loading, going through that skeletal system. Deadlifts, squats, split squats, those sort of exercises with load, stressing the system of the body.
So basic movements like squat, push, pull, things of that nature to work bigger muscle groups will also load arms, legs, everything that's needed, like chest, back, all that sort of stuff. So that's going to load you. So to make it really simple, and this is the thing I think from a coach and a trainer, is lots of coaches and trainers make it way too complex.
Yes. I think the internet makes that, and social media makes that even more apparent. Like, you can find a new wonderful exercise that you must be doing every single day. But fundamentally, if we are squatting, hinging, pushing, pulling, pressing, and carrying, the exercises we use are just tools in a toolbox, right? There isn't this everybody must squat, everybody must deadlift. it's hugely individualized. And
well, let's talk about that then, because there'll be people who can squat, front deadlift, and hinge hip, do hinge hip movements, and there's some people who have never gone to a gym before. They can still lift heavy, or they can still progress to going that direction using fixed path machines, and it's not wrong, right?
Absolutely. We want minimal effective dose. We want to give them the exercises that are going to have the most bang for their buck without negatively impacting their on-bike training. Now, if we got someone with a very low training age, and we firstly, we're trying to teach them a squat, and especially if you're doing it remotely, it's difficult as a coach.
Yes.
But the central nervous system fatigue they're going to feel from squatting and stabilizing and learning that movement is going to cause a lot of muscle soreness, and it's not going to be a pattern that we are going to be able to load hugely quickly. Can we step back from that and say, right, let's get you on a leg press. You've just got to push that weight in one direction. Are we going to be able to progress that quicker? Absolutely. Now, the leg press gets a lot of negative press. It's like, it's not functional. It's not, well, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to increase power output. Can we achieve increase in power output and increase in force production by sitting on a leg press pushing load? Yeah, absolutely we can. The body's not saying, oh, leg press, that's not working for us.
It's a good point. So if you've got someone that's new to it, it might be a little bit off put by lifting weights and may not have skill acquisition or the understanding of how to do something like a squat. Then doing fixed path machines is a great way to get them into it and feeling confident, and maybe using a bodyweight squat or some lightweight squats as a warm up to get them in, to get them to learn that pattern.
So this is when higher rep ranges are useful, right? If someone who's got a low training age, we want connective tissue adaptations before we start loading them heavily.
Let's say someone's never been or not done a lot of strength training. They've done a little bit, but they actually want to start doing something meaningful. How and where would you start them?
Well, I think if we're looking at ultimately progressing them onto hinge-based movements and squatting-based movements, they are, as you said, it's a skill, and there's a skill that we want to teach people. So we can do that alongside starting to load a leg press heavier.
All right.
For the first 2 to 3 weeks, we want to be working higher rep ranges. We want to be drilling those movements. Tempo and reps teach movement. We want to teach the movement, but we want to get that connective tissue strong as well.
Okay. So when you say high rep ranges, what are you talking about?
15.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
10, 15, 20. I mean, initially we're really trying to drill those movements, and we're just trying to get the body. Also when you've got a very low training age, you're going to get that huge neural adaptation.
Yeah. But they're going to be sore.
You're going to get a lot of muscle soreness. So we want to minimize that. And again, it's that minimal effective dose. It's like the 1 times there's a 1 times 20 protocol. I don't know if Dr. Yes who does it, who they use it as an initial one to get back into the gym. So you pick 10 exercises, you do 1 set of 20 on every exercise as a beginner to get you into strength training. It's good, but it's then that once we've got through that first 3 to 4 week block, it's then that we're starting to say, right, what are the adaptations that we want that are beneficial to a cyclist? And that's when it comes to, we want neural adaptations. We don't want morphological adaptations. So we want to be getting neuromuscular adaptations. We want to be getting stronger. We don't necessarily want to be getting huge increases in cross-sectional muscle area.
Yes. Now, okay. So from that perspective, and I think it's good. There's 2 things I think we need to talk about: is how do you get strong without adding muscle, and also we touched on the imbalances of life. Let's say if someone's gone through that initial startup using fixed path machines, what would you get people to do past that is, dare I say the word, functionally good for them to improve maybe an imbalance of their everyday life so it's better for them on the bike?
Okay, so firstly, neural adaptation. So we're looking at learning to use the muscle that is there as efficiently as possible.
Yeah.
And increasing the nervous system and how effectively that can use that muscle without necessarily increasing the amount of muscle tissue that's there. So cyclists get completely obsessed about weight. I think sometimes to a degree where it's negative. I think sometimes actually adding on some muscle mass can be hugely beneficial to performance rather than this obsession with must be lighter, must be lighter. But in general, we want to be getting stronger, and in order to achieve this, we need to be lifting those heavier loads, over 75% of our 1 rep max, for lower rep ranges, sort of 3 to 6 rep range, and sort of trying to stay out of those higher, more bodybuilding hypertrophy rep ranges.
And that's all about pure strength, right? So it's basically lift heavy, lift low repetitions.
Yeah.
And that's going to make you strong and not build muscle mass, which is, of course, look, I get it. As a cyclist, none of us wants to carry excess weight. But I love what you just said there. In fact, that sometimes it's better to put on a little bit more weight because you are stronger. And then because you're stronger, you have more functionality and power as a cyclist to be a better cyclist. So it trades off the little extra weight that you've just put on because you are strong.
Absolutely. I think that's really, really important to realise, and that there is sometimes a huge benefit to be had for having some more muscle tissue. Both upper and lower body, right? And I think as we step away from upper body training as well.
So someone said to me they saw me on Instagram doing some push-pull stuff in between trap bar deadlift. I'm like, why are you doing? They said to me, they actually sent me a private message saying, why are you doing upper body work? And I said, well, have you ever ridden a bike hard and fast for 100 miles? So when you come off that bike, your shoulders, your traps, your chest, your triceps are shot to bits.
Yeah, because because if you're putting big watts into the pedals, that it's got to be transitioned through the body, through the hand, through your arms into the body. If we want to hold good positions on the bike, we need upper body strength. Corner. There's a whole host of benefits, and plus, it's always good to look good on the beach in the summer as well. So it's
and I totally agree with that as well. We're cyclists. We're not trying to win the Tour de France. We're trying to be the best that we can, but we're also trying to be in great shape and as healthy as we can.
Yes.
So, looking at the whole body is a good thing to do.
And I think the other thing as well is that, and you having come with someone who's recently been knocked off their bike, having a little bit of armor on your upper body and strength and structural strength and integrity around your joints from having some upper body musculature, it's pretty helpful if you get knocked off your bike or you fall.
I thought about that a lot over the last 2 weeks, and 100%, if I was one of those skinny cyclists that you see, and I'm not exactly the biggest guy in the world, but if I was one of those really light cyclists, I'd have broken myself.
Yeah.
But I bounced. So, and I put that down to the fact that I've got a good padding of muscle mass.
In terms of progression, the question you asked about progressing on from fixed machines, I think we need to look at what I think single leg exercises are wonderful. I think something like a Bulgarian split squat or a split squat is great. We can achieve huge adaptations without having the as much absolute load going through the system, right? So, loading up a Bulgarian split squat with 2 10 kilo dumbbells versus an 80 kilo barbell squat, I think. But again, it's sort of horses for courses, right? We need to look at what access to equipment people have, how they move, how efficiently they move. I think a back squat and a front squat for people who are over a bike and over a desk a lot often aren't the greatest of exercises. A heavy goblet squat is a wonderful exercise. I think that as a coach, you want a whole, you want all those tools in your toolbox to be able to give different exercises to different people and figure out what is best for them. But certainly, I think we can bring it back to what loads are we trying to apply to people, what reps are we trying to apply to people, and then how we achieve it through that. It doesn't. I think the exercise ultimately is not the most important thing.
Okay. One thing I was going to ask is like, so it's this. I've had varying conversations with different people about should we do strength training before we ride the bike, or should we do strength training after we ride the bike?
I think certainly you don't want to be strength training the day before you're doing a hard session on the bike.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer.
I think if you're doing a lower, especially a lower body session, I tend to total body sessions. But if you're doing a lower body session, you want a zone 2 session the following day. You probably want 36 to 48 hours before you do a hard session on the bike. You can certainly get away with doing them on a hard session on the same day as you do a weight session.
Yeah.
I think we chatted when we chatted on the phone the other day. We talked about this phenomenon of post activation potentiation and how lifting a heavier load can potentiate that muscle to produce greater amounts of force. So if you're doing a lower body session on the same day as you're doing a shorter interval based session, there could be some positive carryover.
Yeah.
But again, it's very individualized, right? How we tolerate fatigue, what our nutrition's like, and how we recover. And age is 46 this year. I can't train I have to be smarter about how I train.
Yeah.
And that's a real mindset shift for me. And I have to decrease the volume of my weight training and be smarter about how I train on the bike.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard because there's a big part of me that wants to smash it all the time, but it's not.
I think I get you. I think from myself, the one thing I've learned about myself from strength training is that if I'm going to do a really tough session on the bike and then strength train in the evening, that's the way I plan it. If I was to do it the other way around, I know neurologically and physically my body would be just going, I can't do that. I can do it bike to gym. I can't do gym to bike.
Yeah, and I think I get that from a mindset perspective as well. Mm-hmm. I think if you've got really tough intervals on the bike, I think if there's any doubt in there, and if you can say to yourself, well, actually, I think you've got a little bit of fatigue in there from that last set of squats you did earlier. You can talk yourself out of it quite quickly, right?
Yeah. But and actually, that's a good point as well, because I often say this. So I sometimes do a strength training session and go out with the boys on Sunday and just go and do a long ride. Yeah. And then I realised that I'm sitting in, I'm doing the zones that I'm supposed to be doing, but they just feel a whole load harder. And it's because I did strength training the day before, and my body's saying, your muscles are fatigued, your central nervous system is finding this tough today. It's not that you can't do it, but your perceived energy exertion is a little bit higher than it would do normally. And it is definitely something to take into account from how people train, whether it should be strength and bike or strength. And I think you're right. Age matters. So get a 20-year-old, it probably doesn't matter which way you do it.
No, I think yes. The recovery is somewhat quicker. I think with strength training, I think if we're looking at cardinal, the key rules, the cardinal rules of training is as with any training, it's consistency, right? It's consistency, and I think this is a thing that I've seen a lot of people talking about recently, is that cyclists go, right, I'm going to lift in the winter, and then it gets to the summer or the spring and the summer, and their weight training just nosedives, or they stop completely. Yeah. And if we look at residual training effects, and so the how long we maintain a physical quality upon cessation of doing that exercise, that type of training completely, strength training is about 30 days. So if we strength train and then we stop strength training completely, after 30 days, that strength that we worked so hard for over the winter is gonna.
Really? What's the trajectory that it goes down? Have you got?
I'm not sure. I'm not actually. I'll have to look at that and get back to you on that. But 30 plus or minus 5 days is that residual training effects of strength training. So you wouldn't do it with any other type of training, would you? You wouldn't do like an 8-week block of VO2 intervals, then stop them completely, and then a month later go, I don't understand why it's not feeling as good as it was. So I think
it's a good point.
So I think that's the other thing that trying to educate cyclists is that yes, strength training is we can fit it in, and we can fit in a higher volume of strength training over the winter period where there's a more of an emphasis on arguably more zone 2 work, and we can fit it in, but it's really important that we keep it going throughout those summer months. And yes, our strength might start to drop off a little bit, but we're going to do what we can with smaller volume and smaller amount to maintain it throughout those summer months.
And actually, this is what I do with the athletes and the cyclists that I coach, is that over the winter, when their volume isn't so much because they can't because it's winter months, we do more strength training. We really try and get them to get as strong as they possibly can do. And then we have in our mind's eye to try and hold on to that strength using tactical ways to train as much as possible all the way through the summer. So when they get back into the winter months, they're not ground zero working.
Yeah, ground zero again. But also, skill acquisition. We've learned a skill and then we've stopped doing it for 6 months, and then we get back in the gym and we're squatting and we're sort of all over the place. So I think it's really important that we maintain it. And then the other really important thing that I try to get across to people when they're lifting is the concept of intent, and trying to lift every rep with intent. And I think that's really important. I think it's very easy to just sort of, even with heavier loads, to just sort of grind and go through the motions. And if we're looking at really trying to recruit those sort of high threshold motor units, those sort of fast twitch muscle fibers, the ones that drop, the ones that we lose at a greater rate when we get older, trying to move loads, not only heavier loads, but with the intent to move them quickly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So it's actually lifting with purpose and mindfulness,
exactly,
and intent all at the same time. So actually super present in what you're trying to achieve in each rep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And actually, that's quite a good point, because actually, if you go into the gym, like the kids are worse for this. Go into the gym, they're really not paying attention to what they're supposed to be doing. They're looking at their phones. And I might be grossly overgeneralizing.
No. I don't want to sound like a grumpy old man, but trying to walk around the gym at the moment is like a slalom course of tripods. So yeah, I think intent present, but also and I think this is where jumping and bounding and hopping is really important.
So you were talking about PAP and plyometric exercises. Do you want to delve into that a bit?
Yeah, a little bit. So I think there's a point past which, so we want to get people strong. We want to get, as cyclists, we want to get that strength ceiling pretty high. There is also a point past which getting someone stronger once they're strong has diminishing returns. So if you're going to a gym and you're deadlifting 140 kilos, is deadlifting 150 kilos going to make a great deal of difference to your performance on the bike? Probably not. Is your ability to produce that force that you've developed quickly going to have an effect for you on the bike? Absolutely. If we're looking at climbing speed, sprint speed, breakaways, or just general speed on the bike, that ability to produce force quickly and rate of force development is really important. So alongside getting people strong, I think keeping people athletic and keeping people having that ability to produce force quickly is really important. And to do that, we need to be lifting moderate to light loads quickly. And moderate to light loads in many cases is just our own body weight. So jumps, box jumps, hops, those sort of things are really important.
So there's one thing I'm thinking of this, and bear in mind the whole point of trying to do this podcast is I'm not aiming at the 20-year-olds, because there'll be 50-year-olds listening to this going, well, I've never been told to do plyometrics and box jumps and things like that. You know, it's not the norm, but everything I'm reading up at and listening to what other people are doing, they're saying that we should be doing this because it's good for our muscles, it's good for our central nervous system, it's very good for aging, and it's good for our performance too. So it's a win-win-win.
It's great for maintaining those fast-twitch muscle fibers, and you know what? It's fun and it's pretty cool to do as well.
Yeah,
and I know they aren't high up there on the list of things that are most important, but you know, jumping and bounding and banded jumps and those sort of things are really, really good to do. And again, we can overcomplicate it. You know, if you go into the gym and you do three sets of 3 broad jumps with 2 minutes rest between each set, it's perfect. Right? There doesn't need to be a hugely high volume. We need to be trying to jump as far as we can each time with intent and purpose. And that's going to be enough to help, you know, to help those physical qualities.
I love the fact that you're in the same way that I think about it. And I sometimes think people think, oh, God, it's a bit boring, but it's not, because it should always be about, can I do this better? Yeah. Can I improve on this? And I love that simplicity of it, because I think a lot of trainers overcomplicate it because they're trying to make it interesting or fun or whatever. But actually that simplicity...
it needs to be kept simple, and we need to, like, programming can be overcomplicated, but there's fundamental movement patterns that we need to keep doing, and we need to keep challenging our bodies. And we can, you know, if you go into the gym with a purpose and you say, well, I'm going to try and jump another 2 centimeters further this week, it's rewarding. And what's really rewarding is seeing that and feeling that on the bike as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, feeling strong on the bike, feeling powerful on the bike. And you know, it doesn't happen every time. We all have days on the bike where it feels like you're cycling through treacle, but you know.
I think I've had a few days like that.
Yeah. but ultimately, it's you know, it's going to improve our performance. It's going to improve a load of physical qualities, but it's also going to improve, as we get older, our overall health, like maintaining that lean muscle tissue, being more athletic.
Everything I'm reading up at the moment is pointed exactly at what you've just said. There's one thing I wanted to ask you. Let's get this off the table, because in camp, or camp hasn't started, but I was chatting to a bunch of people who were sitting around waiting for the dinner to open. They were talking strength training, and they asked me whether I thought Pilates, yoga, and body pump was adequate enough. What are your okay, there you go. Straight off, no.
They have their place, right? You know, and mobility and core strength are important, are very important, and being able to access ranges of movement and maintain our movement, especially around the thoracic spine and our hips, super important. But it's not strength training. You know, strength training involves lifting loads well above and beyond our own body weight once we've got over that initial phase, to elicit the adaptations that we're looking for. And you can't do that through doing yoga and Pilates. Now, doing them running it alongside strength training, absolutely, it can be beneficial. Body pump, I don't want to be careful now. I mean, it's going to train a little bit of muscular endurance. We're spending quite a lot of time doing muscular endurance on the bike, so you probably don't need to do any more of that in a gym environment. It might teach you some movements. It might also reinforce some really bad movements doing lots and lots of reps in a group setting. So you've got to be careful, I think. You know, I don't want to say it's an absolute no. But is it strength training? No, it's not.
No, for all the reasons you just said. And the thing is, we're not hating on any of this. No. We're just saying that, you know, especially for yoga and Pilates, alongside a really good strength training plan, it's great to put in some mobility work, etc. Body pump, okay, maybe endurance, as you say, but ultimately, if you really want to get strong, and improve your physicality as you age, you need to lift properly. You need to lift heavy, and you need to properly strength train.
Absolutely, and I think it's a case of educating people, because as we spoke about on the phone the other day, there's people still don't know this, right? It's still people still worried about getting too big or making you slower, or all of these sort of untruths that still fly around, but especially around the cycling fraternity, that strength training will negatively impact your performance on the bike.
But this thing, so I think a lot of people are just focused on the younger population, and as we said earlier on in this podcast, we were saying ultimately, as you get older, you lose muscle mass, you lose quality strength, you lose your short twitch muscle fibers strength and its ability to function properly. So the only way to get that back or to hold on to it for as long as you can, is to train specifically with strength training and plyometrics.
Absolutely. And why and the question is, why wouldn't you want to do that? What do you want to get to the age of 45, and as you say, sell your road bike, get a touring bike, stick some panniers on the back, and tool around. You are testament to this, and I hope I'm in a similar position to you, where you're riding fast, you're enjoying riding, you're riding big rides, big climbs, and a lot of that is down to the fact that you lift heavy stuff in the gym.
Yeah. In fact, actually, the more I focused on it, because if I'm really honest, if the listeners listen to this, so about 2 years ago, because I was training for Tour de Mont Blanc, and it never happened because of COVID and kept on being rolled back. I stopped going to the gym for 6 months, and then when I rode the bike okay, but when I went back into the gym, I literally couldn't do a squat with a bar. I was like, this is embarrassing. I've got that week, and I swore to myself that would never happen again. But I've noticed the game change by keeping it consistent and being very focused on it. So this year, I've got on the bike and I just feel strong. So I'm riding with my mates, and they're like, "How are you doing that?" And it's like, I'm in a different place than I was last year. No, but you've got a year older. How's that happening?
And it's a great feeling, right?
Yeah, it's a great feeling. And I won't lie to you. Again, I rode with a young guy up Sarcolobra, although actually he was sat my wheel up Sarcolobra. But when we came back, when we were heading back home,
you took the front then. Yeah.
When we were heading back home, he was proper, like, really making me work. But he turned around and said, it's pretty cool to see someone who's done the volume that you've done this week go up Sarcolobra and be able to hang with us at over threshold. And I'm like, that's down to the fact that, yes, I'm very focused with what I do on the bike, but I know it's down to the strength training that I've been doing.
Absolutely. And it's I think, like you said, we've alluded to before, like it doesn't have to be complicated, right? It doesn't. We can keep it simple, and I think that's what puts people off. I think there has to be this hugely complex program, and I think we want to be producing more force through the lower body. We want to have stronger through the upper body. I think something that's often overlooked is that calf complex, and I think making sure we've got a strong calf complex helps transfer force from the legs into the pedals and into the bike.
That's interesting. Actually, that's something I don't train, Chris. And maybe I should.
I think if you look at isometric calf strength and that ability to resist sort of changes in and around that calf complex, it's really a really useful one. Looking at sort of like longer duration isometrics, like just holding 1.5 times body weight, going up into your tiptoes and holding for 30 to 45 seconds. I think they're really, really key. And I know it's a bit more of a running analogy, but I remember hearing someone say you wouldn't try and run a Ferrari on flat tires. And there is a sort of a bit of truth to that in cycling. We still want to be strong in and around that calf complex in order to fully to fully transfer that force that we develop through the quads and through the hips and those big powerful muscles into the pedals.
I'm putting that into strength training as of next week.
Good. And I think core strength as well. I think core strength is really important, but I think cyclists sometimes think that that's all they have to do. I think there's this like.
So talk me through what's really beneficial for cyclists on core strength then.
Well, I think certainly lifting heavy loads is, you know, if you stick a weight on your shoulders and squat up and down, if you're not strong through your midsection, it's not going to end well. So those sort of things are hugely beneficial for training our core. But also we want that ability to resist unwanted movements. So, you know, rather than, you know, that sort of old school, lots of crunches, we want anti-rotation, anti-extension exercises, dead bugs, pull-off presses, those sort of exercises where we're trying to resist unwanted movement. So again, we can hold strong positions on the bike, not have as many energy leaks through inefficient movements and unwanted movement, and also, you know, again, stay injury free, which is, you know, is really key.
That's interesting. And actually, you know, I think the cross rotational core stuff is I actually really like doing it. But yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of people think core work is involved when you're doing squats. It just doesn't factor into their thought process.
No, it doesn't. But like I say, you know, again, we're trying to transfer force through the floor, through the legs, and then there's through our torso and into the bar. So we need to be strong. We need to be braced. We need to be able to create that tension and that stability in and around the spine.
Cool. One thing I was going to ask you. So I think we've covered everything. So is there anything that you wanted to talk about in particular?
I think we've covered most of it. I think what I think is more important than anything else is people aren't afraid of strength training and don't overcomplicate it. And I think that's down to people like you, me, and we're making sure we're getting good information out to people and making sure that people aren't. You know, the other thing, gyms are quite intimidating places if you're not used to being in a gym. And, you know, I've worked in gyms for many years, and sometimes it's really tough and it's really hard to get into a gym and be confident enough to go in there. And I just, you know, I really urge people to do it and to give it a go. I think female cyclists, especially from the bone density perspective, you know, when women are perimenopausal and menopausal, their bone density decreases at a dramatic rate, and even more so, you know, to maintain bone density and strong bones and strong muscles, they need to be lifting heavy loads, and then it's not there's no difference between sexes here. You know, we need to it's the same rep ranges. It needs to be heavy. It needs to be the same training across the board to elicit
interesting
adaptations.
I think, you know, from years of coaching and training people, you will hear the same rhetoric regardless of age. If I lift heavy, I'll get big and bulky. And I always turn around and say, if that happens, tell me, and we will dissect you and find out what's in you that's special.
And we will make millions.
And we'll make millions.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that means you'll die.
The thing is, you know, as in my youth, when I first got into training, you realise how hard it is to put on muscle tissue. It is hard work, huge volume of training, massive amount of reps, a huge amount of eating. You know?
Yes, and no cardio, which was
no cardio, and just strength training alone, I am testament to, does not get you up hills on a bike.
Yeah.
My first ever cycling trip was the first time I did anything for charity. Was along with my cousin, we did Mont Ventoux. So I
sorry, that was your first thing you ever did?
Yeah, first thing I did on a bike. I had an old Specialized Alley, and I rode around the Devon lanes, and that was about it. So we got out to France. my cousin and her two friends were like, well, let's ride into the base of the climb before we start it. So it was an 85-kilometer ride to the base of the climb, which was double the distance of any training ride that I'd done. So needless to say, when we got to the bottom of Vontu, I was somewhat spent, and at this point, all I did was, I was squatting like 180 kilos, but cardio was not my friend, and I made it to the top. I walked the last kilometre and a half and wore my cleats right down. And I know you said when you spoke to me what is one of my favourite climbs. Now it might not be my favourite climb, but it's a climb that I want to go back to and I'd like to do in a slightly different light.
Yeah. I take my hat off to you. This is how people get into cycling. They get the bug because they did something like that and it beat them. Yes. And they go, I'm not going to let that happen again.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And I still, I remember at one point, going at such a pace that I heard this elderly French gentleman said, "Come on, young man," and I looked round and he must have been in his 90s and he shot past me at pace, and that was the point I think that I can't let this happen again.
That's a genius story. So look, how can people find you on social media?
So barbells and bikes on Instagram. That's my current only social media, but I try to put content out in terms of sort of simplifying strength exercises for cyclists, but add some stuff on mobility, some activation work, those sort of things, some sort of usable content for people. I think certainly follow both of us. Let's keep sort of banging the drum for strength training, especially in the older cyclists.
So your Instagram is barbells and bikes. What's your website?
It is barbellsandbikes.com as well.
Okay. And where are you based?
I am based in London, South London. So just around the Greenwich area.
I'm going to finish off the podcast and ask you one last question.
Go.
If you could have dinner with anyone alive or no longer with us, it could be a sports person, celebrity, anybody, who would that be and why?
Interesting. So I was chatting about this with a friend the other day, and we were sort of sticking with a sporting theme. And while I certainly don't agree with what he did, I think as a dinner guest, Lance Armstrong would still be up there as one of the most entertaining and fascinating humans from a sporting perspective. I think his, in an era where, let's face it, everyone was taking large amounts of performance enhancing drugs, he's still allegedly he was still unique in what he did to a point. And I think it's fascinating both from a physiological standpoint, but also from a psychological and that sort of mental drive that he had.
That's a good answer. Look, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Absolute
pleasure. It's a pure pleasure. I hope people listening have got something out of this. I have. Look, you are the first official expert in their field guest. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I've enjoyed it.
Well, that was a really good conversation with Chris. He really knows his stuff. I'm delighted to have an expert on my podcast who can give us the right information, tell us exactly what we should be doing in the gym to improve our strength, but not only that, why we should be doing this and what we should be doing to improve our long-term health and health span. Do me a favor, will you? If you've enjoyed this podcast and you've got some good information that you can use in your own training and your own lifestyle, and you think someone else can benefit from listening to this podcast, share it with your friends. Try and help me get the message out here that I'm trying to help people improve their performance on a bike and also improve their long-term health. I'm just going to leave you with this. thank you very much for listening. There's something that Chris and I were talking about before we did the podcast that I'm going to tag on to the back. He talks about what he's doing on the bike, and he also talks about his son, who has a very rare condition. And underneath this podcast in the comments, and underneath the vlogcast in those comments, I'm going to put all his details of where you can find him, his website, his Instagram page, and the link to his son's charity. So if you enjoyed this podcast, do me another favour, will you? Give what you can to help out this very rare condition. I know Chris would be delighted on that because he's done this for free. I've spent enough of his time this evening chatting to him, so that would be really, really nice of you if you could do that.
Good.
Did you see that come up saying recorded?
I did.
So I've told you what I'm doing. You tell me what you're up to. What things are you doing on the bike?
Well, I've got cycling coming up. I've got Ride London, which was I did it last year. It was the first time they'd run that course out into Essex last year. It was chaotic. I'm sure you probably heard some of the.
No, I didn't. Tell me
some of the feedback about the route. It was quick. It was much flatter than the Surrey route. It was very fast. I think the guys that won it did 350.
Quite, yeah, that's quick. That's
for 100 miles.
Yes, that's quick.
But as such, there were some big crashes. They didn't really keep huge control over who was starting in what pen. There were sort of really experienced guys out with guys who hadn't done that much riding in groups before. So it was a very chaotic start.
Wow.
I think they seem to have suggested that they've got a better handle of it this time. So we'll see how it goes. So I've got that.
So
I've got Tour of Cambridge, which is the one day ride the following weekend.
Yeah.
Which is a qualifier for GB age group.
I was going to say, yes.
We'll see how it goes. I mean, I'm not putting any expectations on it, but I'm gonna ride it. I've got Le Tap on the 9th of July, which is the anime stage, which is 4,500 meters of climbing, I think.
Yeah, it's chunky.
Yeah, it's pretty punchy, I think. In actual fact, I think it looks as tough, if not tougher, than last year's course.
Right. Did you do last year?
I was supposed to do last year, and then I got sick the week before. So I was pretty gutted, really, missing out on Galibier and Alpe d'Huez. It's a pretty iconic finish, right?
So would you say that your riding is sort of like taking on slightly longer events and something that's challenging and hilly? Or,
I mean, to be honest, in terms of my body type, my my sort of my long-term training for the last 30 odd years, high output over high power output over shorter period of times is probably more my physiology. Crit races would probably be ideal for me, but I like that aerobic challenge. I like that endurance. I like that suffering. Maybe is the word. It's the word.
I hear you.
And moving nicely on to the next thing. The idea is to try and Everest Col de Port in sometime over the summer. I haven't got a date for it yet.
So where's Col de Port?
Col de Port down in the Pyrenees. So
right. Okay. Wow.
It's 11.5 ascents, I think, 342 kilometers.
Okay. All right.
So we'll see. I mean, that's I do something every year to raise some money for the charity of the condition that my son's got. So last 2 years ago was the last one. I carried a rowing machine up to the top of the three peaks and rode the height in meters. I actually took a kettlebell up as well and lifted the height in kilos on each one.
Talk me through that. You did what?
So I carried a Concept 2.
Yeah.
To the top of Ben Nevis, Scarfut Pike, and Snowdon. I did this with another two guys actually, and then we took a 20 kilo kettlebell as well. And then at the top of each peak, we rode the height in meters and we lifted the height in kilos. and then carried them back down again, jumped in a car, and then went on to
did it again.
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
Ben Nevis was amazing. It was clear. It was stunning. The views were good. We were fired up. Rowing 2,000 meters on the top of Scarfell Pike in the rain at 1 a.m. was not as inspiring.
I'm laughing because I feel your pain.
Oh, it was miserable, and also, and as wonderful it was, and it was an amazing experience. There's something about when you've been asked for the 3,500 times, "What's that on your back?" It's a rowing machine. Why you got a rowing machine on your back? Gets a little.
That's a great story.
Oh yeah, so Everesting this year, I'm I think I need to start searching out some advice on that, but we'll see.
We can chat about that another time. What I was going to ask you is, what's the charity?
It's my son's condition called Fragile X syndrome. So it's a genetic condition, and there's a small charity that helps with families like ours whose sons predominantly males who have that condition. So yeah, I'd like to try and give a little bit back.
Okay, so when we're done with the podcast,
yeah,
put your link to the charity or your fundraiser, and I'll stick that in the text after the podcast. So if anybody decides they want to donate, they can.
Much appreciated.
And that's it. That's the end of the podcast. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next month.